If you're like me and you think there's nothing hotter than a little blue on blue action, do I have a story for you? Hey, everybody, I'm Steve Green with Bill Whittle and Scott Ott, and this is Right Angle, brought to you by the members of BillWhittle.com. Gentlemen, there's good news and bad news. The bad news is that the COVID relief bill, the 1.9, I think, trillion dollar relief bill, that's a 1 and a 9 and 11 zeros. 11 zeros after the 9. Wow. Is stalled in the Senate because the Democrats are at war with one another over whether or not they should send the checks to illegal immigrants. Oh, my. Talk about your wedge issue. Politico reports that 8 Senate Democrats supported an amendment in the Senate's budget during last week's marathon vote-a-rama. Wow, when Politico gets creative, it's not good. That would prohibit undocumented immigrants from receiving checks, a cast that includes the number 4 Democratic leader Debbie Stabenow from Michigan, a fairly conservative, even if Democratic state, and I think she's up for re-election next year, and Gary Peters, also from Michigan. Oh, they're both up for re-election. Oh, this could be fun. Scott, it's quite a fix they're in. On the one hand, you've got the progressive wing of the party, and they're sort of leading around almost the entire Democratic caucus in the Senate. 42 senators are now on board with sending checks to illegal aliens. Meanwhile, vulnerable senators can't annoy the most vocal wing of the party, particularly the Twitter wing, if you want to call it that, the social justice wing, the outrage mob wing. But they also can't afford to piss off the voters back home. Scott, so I guess my question is there a violin small enough to play for our moderate Democrats right now?
Well, as someone in general who opposes federal government control over our lives and expanding federal spending for things that were not originally called for in the U.S. Constitution, my inclination is that when I hear that Democrats are arguing with themselves over how much to spend, that I will just kind of sit quietly on the sidelines and watch. In no way do I want to discourage them from continuing to have this debate. On the positive side, it's good to see that there's a political party that actually publicly is stating that we're not all marching in lockstep, at least not yet. And I think more of that is actually a good thing, internal division. And I hope that it comes, that when that kind of stuff resolves itself, it tends more in the direction of what I think are constitutional prerogatives rather than extra constitutional ones. It's interesting because it sounded like the way you said that is that somebody wanted to insert language into the bill that said that illegal aliens cannot get this money, which leads me to believe that left without that codicil, that naturally they would have received the money. And so that the way things sit right now, that they would have received checks, but somebody now wants to exclude them. And I think if that's the case, I think there is a deeper issue, and frankly, why we have so much concern about our borders is because when you create a welfare state and then invite people into it and have no qualifications for them to basically tap into that welfare state, then you're just asking for trouble. That said, I believe the vast majority of illegal aliens who come to this country and non-illegal aliens, people who are coming here, are looking for opportunity. They're looking for work. They don't want to sit on the public dole. They really want an opportunity to pursue their dreams and in many cases, send money back to the loser countries that they come from where they can't support their own families. But I want to encourage them to have this debate, and I don't want to interfere with how it may go.
Yeah, go long on popcorn if you're one of those Americans still lucky enough to be able to afford popcorn. And, Scott, what you said about immigrants is true about almost any red-blooded American. We all want to get to work. We all want to be productive members of society. But as long as these lockdowns continue, we're all in the same situation here. Bill, this came to me as kind of a joke when we were shooting our backstage segment that's just for our paying members. But I think maybe there's something to it. We don't have the $1.9 trillion. We don't have a quarter of that much. We're in deficit territory every single year by $1 trillion. It's play money. The Treasury's going to print it up. At this point, as we speed along the road to fiscal ruin, does it really matter if we're sending out an additional $1,400 to illegal immigrants?
Let me deal with that in a minute. The issue of the actual total dollar amount. The real problem that we have seems to be that no one knows how to make a compelling argument of any kind on our side. So we make a feeble attempt to do that. If you're saying that people who are not citizens of the United States of America are entitled to COVID relief packages from the United States government, then that means that has to apply to the entire world. If what you're saying is, well, I'm serious.
This is
it's
great.
either for citizens or it's for citizens plus non-citizens. So if it's for citizens plus non-citizens, then it has to apply to the entire world. And if you're saying don't be ridiculous, then what you're saying is that you have now given everybody in the world incentive to come to America for every reason other than the right reason to come to America, which is to get your free checks and then go back home, which is what this was never the idea of this country. There's never been an immigration wave in this country that was about coming here, taking stuff and going back home. That's what the Spanish did in South America. That's not our bag, man. And so nobody is making the case that if this money is not limited to American citizens, then it is by definition needs to be available to everybody else in the entire world. And I think most Americans would realize that's just plain ridiculous. And so there you are. You've made a compelling argument for keeping this to citizens. As far as your argument about the actual money goes, I'm dismayed and appalled to say I believe you're right, and I've been believing it for a while now. I remember 4 or 5 years ago, I saw a video on how much $1 trillion looks like in terms of $100 bills, and then what $20 trillion in debt look like. It's essentially 17 World Trade Centers made out of brand new $100 bills. And we'll never repay that. I mean, in order to repay that, you have to have a surplus of enough to pay down the debt. Never going to happen. It's never, ever going to happen. So a long time, Steve, a long time, I tried to understand how is this possible? Everybody knows this money is not going to be repaid. It's just not going to be repaid, not as we understand it. So how is it possible? And I came to the conclusion that it's going to continue as long as not so much as long as people think we can repay the debt, but as long as we can make the interest payments on the debt. That's where the actual collapse is going to come. As long as we're making the interest payments on the debt, the people that we owe the money to, and much of that is to ourselves, whatever the case may be, as long as the interest payments are being made, then this goat rodeo will continue. But of course, every year that goes by, as our debt increases, the amount of tax dollars that we pay in terms of interest on the debt also increases. And I suppose that I had my mouth open to say that I suppose that the people in charge, but what I've learned from working here in Hollywood in microcosm is that every time I thought I was going to get a chance to get behind the curtain and see the people running the actual levers, the actual machinery, I thought, well, maybe worst case I'll be disappointed, but I was not prepared for the fact that when you pull back the curtain, it's not a little man in charge. There's no one there. There's no one in charge. Is no one in charge of this thing. It is when you have, what's the amount of non-discretionary spending now? Is it $2.5 billion, $1 trillion, something like that? $2 trillion of money that we have to pay, that we simply cannot cut, right? We've made a promise on.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you have $2,000 billion that have to be paid every year and no one can stop it, no one can say no, then that's not a government. That's a runaway train. And that's where we are now. And the only way to stop a runaway train is for it to go off the rails. And that's what's going to happen sooner or later. It could happen in 100 years, could happen tomorrow, could happen today for all we know. I suppose it's theoretically possible that productivity could increase at such a rate that we can continue to make the interest payments on this debt, but it's certainly not money and it's certainly not economics anymore, Steve. It's all just, the age of money is long past us.
Wow, what a terrible thing. Bill, it occurred to me, I haven't looked up the numbers lately, but the last time I did, and this was just a couple of years ago, we were on track by the mid-2020s for interest on the debt that has to be paid, or, we go into default, that interest on the debt will consume a greater share of the federal budget than either defense or Social Security and Medicare, Medicaid combined.
And it's not a surprise to anybody to realize that as long as we continue to do this, it will be the number one item on the annual payments, and then it will consume all of the tax dollars that we make. And if the people running this country had just the common sense just to freeze it, even today, if they were to freeze it today at $4 trillion a year and just say no more, then you could at least have some rational hope that in 25, 30 years, you would be able to grow so much economy that you would be able to eventually pay that debt down. The Civil War, for the sake of the argument, the Civil War in 1864, 1865, the federal budget was $550 million. That was the total amount of money spent by the U.S. government during the Civil War, and they paid for that war without going into debt. So if they'd gone into debt for $1 billion, that would have been 2 times annual GDP. But if they pinned it there, we'd pay $1 billion off in 10 minutes now? Something like that,
yeah. And there you have it. I didn't want to get too deep into the money woods, but you know what? I've avoided that topic for so long that it was time to bring it up again. Gosh, it's really a lose-lose situation for the Democrats. They are the moderate Democrats. I mean, they're stuck between 2 rocks and 1 hard place. The first rock is economic reality. We've spent all the money and then some, as Bill just told you. The second rock is the political reality that if moderate Democrats behave like radical Democrats, the other 42 Democrats, and go in on giving away all this money to people who have no business getting all this money, then they're going to have to face their own constituents in November of 2022. Those are 2 pretty serious rocks. But the hard place is the Democrats' own hardcore left woke progressive wing, who also make up the media. If they go against these people, they will never hear the end of it there either. And as we saw over the last 4 years, that Democrat media complex can completely poison the media and even the culture against a political candidate or a political office holder that they don't like. Donald Trump. Excuse me, something got in my throat there. So when I say it's a lose-lose situation for these Democrats, well, that's what I like to think of as a win-win situation for me. And there you have it. That's your right angle on that, brought to you by the members of BillWhittle.com. Got to remind you that content like this needs sponsors like you. So if you've been watching these shows for free, we would love it if you go over to BillWhittle.com, click Join Now, join our growing membership, or even just make a one-time donation. We've even got a great big button for that. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.